September 9, 2000. Montebello, California. 3:19 a.m. A lamp glows in the corner of the bedroom, its light falling in a quiet circle on the carpet. Paramedics step inside and freeze. On the floor lies 41-year-old Jose Francisco Frank Rodriguez, face down, arms loose at his sides, the kind of stillness that doesn't belong to someone who simply drifted off to sleep. There's no blood, no overturned furniture, nothing that speaks of struggle. Just the ordinary marks of a life paused mid-stride. A glass of water waiting on the nightstand, a remote perched on the arm of a chair, tomorrow's shirt already set out. Police move through the hallway in low voices, the thrum of radio static tucked under the pulse of cruiser lights flickering against the stucco outside. In the living room, his wife, Angelina, answers what she can through tears. The coroner's first look shows nothing. No stroke, no heart attack, nothing that makes sense. Only a name written down under a flashlight beam. By the time the sun rises, a new line enters the file. A call to the family's insurance agent about a freshly issued policy. A small procedural note, the kind that usually lives in the background, until the background starts to take over. It was supposed to be a natural death, a room without violence. But this story refuses to sit quietly. If you're drawn to cases where the truth hides in plain sight, stay close. Frank Rodriguez was the kind of teacher students don't forget, the one with the calm voice, the steady rules, and that rare patience that made you believe he actually wanted you to understand, not just pass. In early 2000, while teaching at Angel Gate Academy, a youth program, he met Angelina. The pull between them was quick and undeniable. By April 8th, just months later, they were married. Two lives stitched together under one roof in Montebello, a sun-baked corner of Los Angeles County where weekends carried the smell of fresh-cut grass and soap from driveway car washes. Angelina's 9-year-old daughter, Autumn, came with her, and suddenly the mornings felt different. One coffee mug cooling on the counter, two lunches packed, a backpack propped by the door. Bills collected on the same table, keys tossed into the same bowl. It wasn't just a new marriage. It was the start of a household, a little family inventing its rhythm as they went. For a moment, the picture was perfect. What no one realized was how quickly that picture could come undone. By July 2000, the marriage carried more than rings and routines. It carried paperwork. A $250,000 life insurance policy on Frank, with Angelina named as the primary beneficiary. The approval date is clear in the file, July 26th. On its face, it looked practical, even responsible. Two adults trying to build a safety net. But later, investigators would point back to how that net was tied together, and who was tugging hardest on the knots. People remembered the urgency coming from Angelina, the push to get it signed and sealed. At the time, no one thought in terms of motive. It was just signatures, a monthly premium, another box ticked in the business of married life. Outside the paperwork, though, there were words that wouldn't hold up well. Frank's friend Palmyra Gorham recalled a moment that stung in hindsight. Angelina joking, "Why bother divorcing when there's a policy?" She remembered talks that brushed up against poisons people in Southern California know by name, but rarely say out loud. Oleander from the garden, antifreeze from the garage. Labor Day weekend, September 3rd, a gas company technician stepped into the Montebello garage and found two leaks. One note on his worksheet stands out even now. The dryer's shut-off valve was very loose, not the kind of loose that just happens. He tightened it, tested the lines, and left with the place marked safe. Later, a man named Lauren Moranis, Angelina's lover, would testify that she admitted she'd left some kind of gas on to kill Frank. What most families would chalk up as a scare, here looks more like a rehearsal. 4 days later, September 7th, the story tilted again. Frank landed in the ER, doubled over with vomiting and diarrhea, the kind of symptoms nurses see every shift. The diagnosis, food poisoning, nothing exotic. He was discharged with ordinary instructions, rest, fluids, Gatorade if he could hold it down. Angelina signed him out and took him home. Only later, when toxicologists retraced the trail, did those hours get a new label, consistent with oleander poisoning, the same plant that lines Southern California medians and backyards, suddenly tangled in a medical mystery. So when Frank lay down to sleep in the early hours of September 9th, The danger wasn't waiting outside the house. It had already been inside, quietly twice, leaving almost nothing behind but a sick man trying to sip his way back to normal, and dates that, in hindsight, trace a pattern straight toward tragedy. October is when the story bends. Angelina reaches out to investigators with a tip she claims came from an anonymous caller. Ask about antifreeze. It's a strangely precise suggestion, the kind that changes the air in the room. Toxicologists follow the thread, running tests they hadn't considered before. This time, they're looking for ethylene glycol, the syrupy coolant that slips unnoticed into a drink. Its sweetness easy to mistake for kindness until it breaks the body down from the inside. Frank's system shows fatal levels of ethylene glycol, and alongside it, traces of oleander. The medical examiner changes the death certificate, poisoning by ethylene glycol with oleander. Once poison was confirmed, the story tried to shift. The focus turned outward toward a former co-worker from the youth program, a man who, at least on paper, could have known Frank's schedule. Then an anonymous fax landed at the sheriff's office, pointing the finger squarely at him. It looked like the kind of break detectives wait for. Clean, simple, ready to chase. But February 2001 in Paso Robles, the twist unraveled. Officers arrested Angelina. Inside her purse, they found the so-called anonymous fax, original copy. Alongside it, a Staples confirmation slip marking the exact time and place it had been sent. And folded in the same bag, a napkin with the sheriff's fax number scrawled across it, like a reminder to herself. Prosecutors lay out the story in a sequence the jury doesn't have to strain to follow. Doctors call it food poisoning, but years later, toxicologists would say the symptoms lined up neatly with oleander. The discharge sheet told him to rehydrate with Gatorade. 2 nights later, September 9th at 3:19 a.m., Frank was dead. No bruises, no trauma, just stillness. By October, when Angelina passed along an anonymous tip to test for antifreeze, the lab found exactly that, lethal levels of ethylene glycol with oleander alongside it. To the state, the pattern is undeniable. Motive shows up in the phone records, calls to the insurance company almost as soon as Frank's body was found, and again in the weeks that followed. Method shows up in the science. Ethylene glycol dissolves easily into a sports drink, its sweetness masking its danger. Oleander's effects fit the ER visit to the letter. And intent shows up in the forgery, the anonymous fax that wasn't anonymous at all, complete with the transmission slip and the sheriff's fax number scribbled on a napkin in Angelina's purse. When those pieces are threaded together, the theory is blunt. The prosecutor's closing picture was simple but chilling. The bedroom looked calm because the weapon wasn't a knife or a gun. It was chemistry. And the cover story wasn't chance or grief. It was paper. The verdict comes down. Guilty of first-degree murder with special circumstances, poisoning and financial gain. The jury also convicts on trying to dissuade a witness, though they split on the charge of solicitation. With guilt decided, the case moves into its penalty phase. In November 2003, the same jury returns with the harshest recommendation the law allows: death. On January 12, 2004, Judge William R. Pounders makes it official. From the bench, he calls the crime exceptionally cruel and callous, and sentences Angelina to die. The penalty phase isn't about guilt. That part is settled. It's about who the defendant is, what the past suggests, and whether patterns matter. For prosecutors, that meant reaching back a decade to 1993 and the loss of Angelina's 13-month-old daughter, Alicia. The story the jury hears is unsettling. Just 2 months before Alicia's death, a $50,000 life insurance policy had been taken out on the child, something her father didn't know about. When Alicia died, it was reported as a tragic accident, a pacifier nipple that broke off, causing her to choke. In the aftermath, there were payouts: $50,000 from the policy and another $710,000 from a civil settlement with the manufacturer. Years later, while investigating Frank's death, detectives searching Angelina's home found a polymer expert's report. That report challenged the original explanation, casting doubt on whether the pacifier could have failed under normal use. Alicia's death was never prosecuted as a crime. No charges were filed. But in a penalty trial, the threshold is different. The prosecution used it not as proof beyond a reasonable doubt, but as a story thread, a suggestion of pattern. Death followed by money. Paperwork in place before tragedy. Explanations that unravel when tested against science. The defense pushes back with context and caution. Grief is not guilt, they tell the jury. Civil settlements don't prove criminal intent. To drag in the death of a baby risks stirring emotion more than it informs. And they remind everyone in the room that Frank's case has already been decided. The question now is how he should be punished, not whether she caused his death. Jurors hear both sides, but patterns carry weight. For the state, the insurance policy on a child, the payouts that followed, and the expert report pulled years later all sketch a familiar outline. In November 2003, the jury makes clear which version they believe when they return with a sentence of death. That decision would be challenged years later, not on the facts themselves, but on questions about how the penalty phase was handled. On February 20th, 2014, the California Supreme Court speaks with one voice. Conviction affirmed, death sentence affirmed. In the eyes of the court, the record holds. 5 years later, the ground shifts. In March 2019, California announces a moratorium on executions. Eventually, a court grants a new penalty hearing, not to relitigate the murder or reopen the toxicology charts, but to ask one narrower question. What should the punishment be? Through all of it, the foundation doesn't budge. The conviction stands. The story the jury accepted, life insurance, near misses, poison, a forged fax, remains the spine of the case. In 2024, the case comes back to court with one question left on the table. Punishment. This time, the district attorney makes a quiet but enormous choice. The office will not pursue death again. The law allows it. The prosecutor simply chooses not to. On November 18th, 2024, the sentence shifts from death to life without the possibility of parole. Nothing else moves. The conviction remains. The toxicology remains. The forged facts and the timeline remain. What changes is only the state's power to take a life off the end of the story. That's why detectives cling to the smallest details. A valve too loose to be chance, sweetness where it doesn't belong, an insurance call made before a cause of death was known. Those are the threads that, when pulled tight, turn a silent room into something loud. And once you see the whole weave, gas, oleander, antifreeze, forged paper, the ordinary things in that bedroom stop looking ordinary at all. They look arranged. They look staged. Where does justice land when a death leaves no mark? One jury said the case was proven. Years later, the state stepped back from execution and chose life without parole instead. The conviction, the chain of policy, poison, and paper, never moved. What changed was the punishment. Some see that as mercy. Some see it as restraint. Others call it unfinished. If you believe the state's version, this was careful planning hidden under a smile, caregiving turned into delivery. What lingers is the harder question. What standard do we demand before the state takes a life? And what does accountability mean when the weapon looks like care and the crime scene looks like home? So where do you land? Did the resentencing strike the right balance? Justice without execution? Or should death have stayed on the table, given everything in the record? Leave your take in the comments. And if you want more cases where the truth hides in plain sight, share this video with someone who sees it differently and tap the bell so you don't miss the next deep dive. The answers won't always be clean, but the search for them should always be real.